In order to be a legend, you have to stand out. In order to stand out, you have to change something. In order to change something, you have to go against the grain. In order to go against the grain, you have to be different. People today have their set ideas and standards for everything. We as a society like a routine, like doing the same things over and over. Doing something different is weird. We like staying in our comfort zone. But that's why most of us aren't legends. In order to stand out, make change, you must go against the grain, think creatively, be innovative. All things that Billy Beane, the main character in Moneyball, knows quite a lot about. Billy Beane was a high school baseball superstar in the eyes of professional baseball scouts. His athleticism and baseball production led him to be a first-round draft pick with the Mets. While he had an offer to play and further develop at Stanford, Billy chased the bag and signed with the team. Unfortunately, his career didn't pan out, and it was quickly discovered that he was a bust. Eventually, he transferred to be a scout and eventually the Oakland A's GM. At this time, the Oakland A's were one of the poorest teams in the MLB, so to build a competitive team, Billy had to be very smart and meticulous with his decisions on players. To do so, he followed the ideas of one of his talent scouts, Paul DePodesta, and the father of sabermetrics, Bill James. Both took looking at analytics to the next level. The thing was, the league was not like that. They didn't value studying statistics and were very surprised and caught off guard by Billy's strategy. The same went for the fans. There were many questions, but fans would soon get an answer, a best-case scenario answer. Part of what made Billy's draft so unique was that he straight up cut all high school players off his leaderboard. The thing was, Billy looked at his own scenario being a high school gamble. He and Paul didn't want to gamble on players, so they stuck with college players. Because their desired players were so unorthodox, they ended up drafting 13 of the players that they wanted. Absolutely unheard of. Billy didn't care about conventional wisdom. He was committed to his new idea. One of the most famous instances of Billy's geniusness was called recreating the aggregate. The A's were unable and unwilling to pay star player Jason Giambi. In order to replace him, the goal was to replace him with players that did things that he did well. One of those players was Scott Hatteberg, known for his very weak arm due to an accident. However, he had quite valuable traits as a hitter, strong plate discipline, and a high on-base percentage. He eventually got placed as the first baseman, and he ended the season as one of the most consistent hitters in the league. That best-case scenario I mentioned earlier took form in a record 20-game win streak, a game in which Scott Hatteberg displayed his plate discipline. When given the perfect pitch, he hit the game-winning home run. Unfortunately for the A's, they lost their first playoff series against the Minnesota Twins. While it was a massive disappointment, teams believed in Billy's new strategy, so much so that the Boston Red Sox gave him the highest contract in history, but Billy turned it down. He remembered chasing a bag back in high school, remembering that was one of the biggest mistakes of his life. So instead, he stayed put as the Oakland A's GM. One of the most glaring communication concepts of this class brought up in the book is labor management. As a smaller market team, the A's had to figure out how to build a competitive team against others that had much more money. Without a salary cap, teams with more money were more willing to throw money at star players such as Jason Giambi, who made $17 million with his new team. That's what forced Billy to be creative with his roster construction. He couldn't go all out to find elite talent. That was way too expensive. He needed to find hidden talent for extremely cheap costs, which is what he was able to do with the help of analytics. That also ties into defying a classic sports myth. It was simply uncommon to follow analytics and use them to help build your team. Teams and fans thought you build based off of your eye test and physical attributes. But that's why the Mets originally drafted Billy. He was a sensational athlete in high school and looked to be a great player, but it just didn't work out. Billy defied what seemed to be logic and ended up creating a new era of baseball strategy. For me, this book is a clear-cut 10 out of 10. I'm not a big reader at all, but this book really pulled me in. I definitely recommend this book to anyone who enjoys baseball, as the story has shaped the sport into what it is today, so highly suggest that someone reads it. Also, anyone into sports analytics should read this book, since that is what helped propel Billy with his new strategy that eventually changed the league. This will probably not come as a surprise, but the most interesting part of this book is just reading about the strategy that Billy uses to develop a team. Going against the grain, going with analytics, and then reading about how that starts to change an era, how fans, how teams, how players view analytics and just view the game of baseball as a whole. They start viewing it and seeing the game much differently, all because of Billy and how he started to develop this team. And what makes it crazy is he had to do this on such a strict budget. He could not spend money. And that's what I think made this so freaking cool. He accomplished what he did with very little resources. He did not have the money. And so that's what made this so cool. That's what made this so groundbreaking. He was able to make this team off of analytics and without money. And me personally, I've always been fascinated with team development. Not only do I get to get a glimpse of what's going on in a GM's mind reading this book, but then I also get to listen to how it defied common sense. That's just so interesting to me. And, I've had thoughts of wanting to be a football coach, so reading about the strategy, it really made me think about different scenarios and ways that I could possibly use players on my football team. I wouldn't say it forces, but it challenges me to think creatively and be creative and think outside the box. I'm sitting here telling myself, do things that are uncommon, but also make sure you do them with a purpose and with reason. Don't let some silly old myth or silly old way deter you from doing what you believe in. And in the end, that's the theme of this book. Going against the grain in order to change something, changing something to stand out, and standing out so you can one day be a legend.